The social worker held her hand too tightly. That was the first thing she remembered about the day everything changed. The woman's fingers were cold and her grip was firm, like she was afraid the little girl might run away. But where would she run? There was nowhere left to go. Lily was 6 years old when she walked through the iron gates of Street Catherine's home for children. The building was old and gray, with tall windows that looked like tired eyes staring down at her. A group of kids played in the front yard, laughing and chasing each other. They stopped to watch as she passed. She kept her head down and clutched the only thing she had left in this world, a small, worn photograph with bent corners. In the picture, a woman sat at a piano. Her fingers rested gently on the white keys, and she was smiling. Not the kind of smile people make for cameras. It was real, soft, full of love. That woman was her mother, and 3 weeks ago, she had closed her eyes and never woken up. Lily didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't cry when they packed up their tiny apartment. She didn't cry when strangers told her everything would be okay. She just held the photograph and stayed quiet. The adults said she was in shock. They whispered words like trauma and processing grief. But Lily wasn't processing anything. She was just empty, like someone had reached inside her chest and taken out everything that made her feel alive. The first few months at Street Catherine's were the hardest. The other children didn't know what to make of her. She barely spoke. She didn't play with them. She would sit by the window for hours, watching the street outside, watching cars pass by, watching people walk their dogs or push strollers. The caretakers tried to include her in activities, but she would just shake her head and return to her spot by the window. "She's a strange one," she once heard a staff member say. "Doesn't talk, doesn't smile." Lily pretended not to hear, but she heard everything. Families came to the orphanage every few weeks. They would tour the building, meet the children, and sometimes, if a child was lucky, they would leave with a new mom and dad. Lily watched these visits from a distance. The other kids would put on their best clothes and their brightest smiles. They would laugh louder, play harder, do everything they could to be noticed. But Lily couldn't do that. She didn't know how to pretend anymore. One couple looked at her once. The woman had kind eyes and the man had a warm smile. For a moment, Lily felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe. But then the couple's gaze moved on to a younger boy with curly hair who was showing them a drawing he made. They chose him. They always chose someone else. After a while, Lily stopped hoping. It was easier that way. The seasons changed. Summer turned to fall, and fall turned to a long, cold winter. Lily turned 7 alone. There was a small cake in the dining hall and the other children sang, but it didn't feel like a birthday. It felt like just another day in a place that wasn't home. One afternoon in early spring, something happened that would change her life forever. It was raining outside, the kind of heavy, endless rain that made the whole world feel gray and sad. The other kids were in the common room watching television. Lily didn't like the noise and the crowd, so she wandered off to find somewhere quiet. She walked down a hallway she had never explored before. It was in the old wing of the building, where the paint was peeling and the lights flickered. Most of the rooms were used for storage now, filled with broken furniture and dusty boxes. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that was slightly open. Lily pushed it gently, and it creaked as it swung inward. The room was dark, except for a thin stream of light coming through a dirty window. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. And there, in the corner of the room, covered by a white sheet, was something large and rectangular. Lily walked toward it slowly. Her heart was beating faster, though she didn't know why. She reached out and grabbed the edge of the sheet. With one pull, she yanked it away, and a cloud of dust rose into the air. It was a piano, old and forgotten, with chipped wood and yellowed keys. But it was a piano. Lily stood frozen. She hadn't seen a piano since her mother died. She hadn't even thought about pianos. It hurt too much to think about them, but now, standing in this dusty room with rain tapping against the window, she couldn't look away. She sat down on the bench. It wobbled a little, but it held her weight. Her hands trembled as she raised them to the keys. She pressed 1. The note rang out, slightly out of tune but still clear. It echoed in the empty room, and something stirred inside her. She pressed another key, then another. She didn't know what she was doing. She had never had a lesson in her life. Her mother used to play while Lily sat beside her, watching and listening, but she had never taught Lily how to play. There was supposed to be time for that later, but later never came. Now, alone in this forgotten room, Lily began to play. Not a song, not even a melody. Just sounds, just notes floating in the air, one after another. It was messy and clumsy and wrong, but it was something. It was the first time in almost a year that she had felt anything other than numb. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She just kept pressing keys, kept making sounds, kept feeling. She stayed in that room until the rain stopped and the light faded from the window. When she finally stood up, her legs were stiff and her fingers ached. But something inside her had shifted, something small and fragile, like a seed buried in frozen ground waiting for spring. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Lily snuck out of her bed. She crept through the dark hallways, her bare feet cold against the floor, until she reached the storage room. She pushed open the door and sat down at the piano again. And she played. She came back the next night. And the night after that. Every night for weeks. She would wait until the building was quiet, and then make her way to the piano. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't have sheet music or a teacher. She just had her ears and her memories. She tried to remember the songs her mother used to play. She would hum a melody in her head and then try to find the notes on the keys. Most of the time, she got it wrong. But sometimes, just sometimes, she got it right. And when she did, it felt like her mother was right there beside her, smiling that soft, real smile from the photograph. The piano became her secret, her escape. The one place where she didn't feel so alone. The other kids still thought she was strange. The caretakers still labeled her as difficult. Families still passed her over for children who smiled more, and talked more, and tried harder to be wanted. But Lily didn't care anymore, because she had found something that was hers, something no one could take away. She had found her voice, even if no one else could hear it yet. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into a full year. Lily kept her secret well. Every night, after the lights went out and the other children fell asleep, she would slip out of her bed and make her way through the dark hallways to the storage room. The floorboards creaked under her feet, but she learned which ones to avoid. She learned how to open the door without making a sound. She learned how to play softly enough that no one would hear. The piano became her entire world. During the day, she went through the motions of life at Street Catherine's. She attended classes, ate her meals, did her chores, but her mind was always somewhere else. She would tap her fingers on her desk, practicing patterns she had discovered the night before. She would hum melodies under her breath, trying to remember the songs her mother used to play. At night, everything changed. In that dusty room with the flickering light, Lily came alive. She experimented with the keys, teaching herself how different notes sounded together. Some combinations were harsh and ugly. Others were beautiful, like colors blending on a canvas. She did not know the proper names for anything. She did not know about scales or chords or musical theory. She only knew what sounded right and what sounded wrong. She tried to recreate her mother's songs from memory. It was frustrating work. She would remember a piece of a melody, find the notes on the piano, and then hit a wall. The next part would be gone, lost somewhere in the fog of grief and time. She would try different combinations, searching for the missing pieces like someone digging through rubble for treasure. Sometimes she found what she was looking for. A phrase would suddenly click into place, and for a moment, it was like her mother was right there beside her. Those were the moments she lived for, but most of the time, she played her own music. Sounds that came from somewhere deep inside her. Sad sounds, angry sounds, hopeful sounds. She did not plan them, they just happened, flowing out of her fingers like water from a spring. She did not know that what she was doing was called improvisation. She did not know that most children her age could not do it at all. She just knew that when she played, she felt less alone. One evening, something changed. It was late autumn, and the nights were getting colder. Lily had wrapped herself in an old blanket before sneaking out of bed. She made her way to the storage room and began to play. Lost in her own world as usual, she did not hear the door open. She did not notice the figure standing in the shadows, watching her. She only became aware that she was not alone when the music ended, and she heard someone crying. Lily spun around on the bench, her heart pounding. Standing in the doorway was an old woman she had seen around the orphanage a few times. She was one of the volunteers who came in to help with meals and activities. She had white hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that were now filled with tears. Lily froze. She was caught. Her secret was over. They would take the piano away. They would punish her for sneaking out after curfew. Everything she had built over the past year was about to crumble. But the old woman did not yell. She did not call for the staff. She just stood there, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks, looking at Lily like she was seeing a ghost. "Please," Lily whispered. "Please do not tell anyone." The woman said nothing. She walked slowly into the room, her footsteps soft on the dusty floor. She stopped beside the piano and ran her hand along the worn wood. Her fingers trembled. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I taught myself," Lily said. "My mother used to play." I try to remember her songs. The woman closed her eyes. For a long moment, she just stood there, her hand resting on the piano. When she opened her eyes again, something had changed in them. The tears were still there, but so was something else. Something that looked like purpose. "My name is Mrs. Park," she said, "and I am going to help you." Lily did not understand at first. Help her do what? But Mrs. Park sat down beside her on the bench. And slowly, gently, she began to tell her story. 50 years ago, Mrs. Park had been a concert pianist. She had performed on stages across the country, played for audiences of thousands, lived a life filled with music and applause and joy. The piano had been her whole existence. It was how she spoke to the world. Then, one winter, she woke up with pain in her hands. The doctors said it was arthritis. At first, it was mild. She could still play, though not as easily as before. But over the years, it got worse. The stiffness spread. The pain grew sharper. Eventually, she could no longer perform. She could no longer play the pieces she had spent her life mastering. The music that had defined her was locked away, trapped inside a body that had betrayed her. She had spent decades grieving that loss. She volunteered at places like Street Catherine's to keep busy, to feel useful. But something inside her had been hollow for a very long time. Then she heard Lily play. "You have a gift," Mrs. Park said, her voice thick with emotion. "A rare and precious gift. I heard it the moment you touched those keys. The way you play, it is not just technique. It is feeling. It is soul. I have not heard anything like it in 50 years. Lily did not know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her and seen something valuable. "I cannot play anymore," Mrs. Park continued. "My hands will not let me. But I can still teach. I can give you everything I know. Everything I spent my life learning." She turned to face Lily, her eyes burning with intensity. "Will you let me?" Lily felt something shift inside her chest. It was like a door opening to a room she did not know existed. For the first time since her mother died, someone was offering her something more than pity or duty. Someone was offering her a future. "Yes," she said, "please." From that night on, everything was different. Mrs. Park came to the orphanage every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. At first, they kept their lessons secret, meeting in the storage room after hours. Mrs. Park brought old sheet music from her apartment, yellowed pages covered in notes and markings from her performing days. She taught Lily how to read music, how to understand what all those symbols meant. She taught her about rhythm and tempo and dynamics. But more than that, she taught her about emotion, about how to take the feelings inside and channel them through the keys, about how to tell a story without words. Lily soaked it all up like a sponge. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes until her fingers ached and her eyes could barely stay open. She had never worked so hard at anything in her life. But it did not feel like work. It felt like breathing. It felt like finally becoming who she was meant to be. The caretakers eventually noticed. It was impossible to hide forever. But by then, Lily's improvement was so remarkable that even Mr. Davies, the stern director, could not argue with the results. The piano was moved from the storage room to a small practice room near the back of the building. Mrs. Park was officially allowed to continue her visits. Lily still did not speak much. She still kept to herself. But the other children noticed something different about her. There was a light in her eyes now. A quiet confidence that had not been there before. When she walked to the practice room each day, she walked with purpose. She was still an orphan. She was still the strange girl who had arrived with nothing but a photograph. But she was also becoming something else. She was becoming a pianist. And somewhere, in a place beyond the clouds and the stars, Lily liked to believe her mother was watching. Smiling that soft, real smile, proud of the girl her daughter was becoming. The years passed slowly at Street Catherine's, but Lily barely noticed. While other children counted the days until they might be adopted or until they turned 18 and aged out of the system, Lily counted something else entirely. She counted the hours until she could sit at the piano again. By the time she turned 14, she had changed in ways no one at the orphanage fully understood. She was still quiet. She still kept to herself. But there was something different in her eyes now. A spark that hadn't been there before. The empty girl who arrived clutching a photograph had found something to hold on to. Something that gave her life meaning. Mrs. Park had been teaching her for nearly 7 years. What started as secret lessons in a dusty storage room had grown into something much bigger. The orphanage eventually found out about their arrangement, but by then, Lily's talent was impossible to ignore. They moved the old piano to a small practice room and allowed Mrs. Park to continue visiting. It wasn't generosity. It was simply easier than fighting about it. But even Mrs. Park, with all her years of experience and her own history as a concert pianist, had started to realize something. Lily wasn't just talented. She was extraordinary. The kind of extraordinary that comes along once in a generation. "I have nothing left to teach you," Mrs. Park said one afternoon, her voice soft with emotion. They had just finished a session, and Lily had played a piece so beautifully that Mrs. Park had to stop and catch her breath. "Everything I know, you have already taken and made your own. You've gone beyond me, child." Lily shook her head. "That's not true. You still help me. Every day. I guide you," Mrs. Park said. "But the music? That comes from somewhere I cannot reach. It comes from your soul." Word began to spread. Mrs. Park had friends in the music world. Old colleagues, former students, people who still remembered her name from her performing days. She would tell them about Lily, just casually at first, a mention here and there. But the stories grew, and soon, people in certain circles began to whisper about a prodigy hidden away in an orphanage. A girl with no formal training, who could play like she had been born with music in her blood. One evening, Mrs. Park arrived at the orphanage with a strange look on her face. She was holding a piece of paper, and her hands were shaking slightly. "What is it?" Lily asked. Mrs. Park sat down beside her on the piano bench. She took a deep breath. "There is a competition," she said. "A national competition for young pianists. The winner receives a full scholarship to one of the best music academies in the country, and they get to perform at a concert hall in front of thousands of people." Lily felt her heart skip. "That sounds amazing. Who is entering?" Mrs. Park looked at her. Really looked at her. "You are." Lily laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Mrs. Park wasn't smiling. "I sent them a recording," Mrs. Park continued. "3 months ago. I recorded you playing when you didn't know I was listening. I sent it to the competition committee." She paused. "Lily, they selected you as a finalist." The words didn't make sense at first. Lily stared at her teacher, waiting for the punchline. But there was no punchline. Mrs. Park held out the piece of paper. It was a letter, printed on fancy stationery with an official seal at the top. Lily read it 3 times. Her name was right there in black and white. She had been chosen from thousands of applicants across the country. She was one of 12 finalists. The competition would be held in 8 weeks at a famous concert hall. If she won, her entire life would change. "I don't understand," Lily whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you would say no," Mrs. Park said gently. "I knew you would tell me you weren't ready, that you weren't good enough. So I made the decision for you. And I was right to do it. Look at that letter. They want you. Lily, they heard you play, and they want you." For the first time in years, Lily felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Real, burning, terrifying hope. The kind that made her chest tight and her eyes sting with tears. But hope, she had learned, was a dangerous thing. The next morning, Mrs. Park went to speak with Mr. Davies, the director of Street Catherines. He was a practical man with a stern face and a firm belief that children in his care needed to focus on realistic goals: college preparation, job training, skills that would help them survive in the real world. He had never understood the piano. He saw it as a distraction, a hobby, certainly not something worth investing time and resources into. Lily waited outside his office, her stomach twisted in knots. She could hear voices through the door, but she couldn't make out the words. The conversation went on for a long time. Too long. When Mrs. Park finally emerged, Lily knew the answer before she even spoke. It was written all over her face. He said no. The words hit Lily like a physical blow. "What? Why?" Mrs. Park's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "He says you need to focus on your future. A real future," he called it. "He thinks the competition is a fantasy. A waste of time. He won't approve the travel, the expenses, any of it." "But the letter," Lily said, her voice breaking. "They chose me. Out of everyone in the country, they chose me." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Lily pushed past her and walked to the director's office. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and walked in. Mr. Davies looked up from his desk, his expression immediately hardening. "Miss Lily, you should knock before entering." "Please," she said. The word came out raw and desperate. "Please let me do this. I have never asked for anything. In 8 years, I have never asked for a single thing. But I am asking now. Please." Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair. "I understand this is disappointing. But my job is to prepare you for reality, not to chase impossible dreams. Do you know how many children compete in these things? Do you know how many of them come from wealthy families with the best teachers money can buy? You would be setting yourself up for failure and heartbreak. You don't know that. I know enough." His voice was final. "The answer is no. You will stay here, continue your studies, and focus on building a practical future. That is my decision." Lily stood there, frozen. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to grab him by the shoulders and make him understand what this meant to her. But she did none of those things. She just turned and walked out. That night, she didn't go to the piano. For the first time in 7 years, she couldn't bring herself to touch the keys. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt all the hope drain out of her body. It was like being 6 years old again, like standing at those iron gates with a stranger holding her hand too tightly. She pulled out the photograph of her mother. The edges were even more worn now, soft from years of being held. She looked at her mother's face, at her fingers resting on those piano keys, at that soft and real smile. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered into the darkness. "I tried." She cried that night. For the first time in years, she cried until her whole body ached, and her pillow was soaked with tears. She cried for her mother, She cried for herself. She cried for a dream that had been given to her and then ripped away before she could even hold it. But across town, in her small apartment filled with old concert programs and faded photographs, Mrs. Park was not crying. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside her, and she was thinking, she had not spent 7 years pouring her heart into this child just to watch some bureaucrat crush her spirit. She had not discovered a gift this rare and precious just to let it be buried by fear and small-mindedness. Mr. Davies had said no. But Mrs. Park had learned something important in her 73 years of life. No was not always the final answer. She picked up her phone and started making calls. Old friends, former students, anyone who might listen, anyone who might help. The fight for Lily's future was just beginning. Mrs. Park did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until the sun came up, making phone calls, writing emails, and reaching out to everyone she had ever known in her long life. By morning, her voice was hoarse and her tea had gone cold 3 times over. But she had a plan. It started small. A few of her former students, now grown adults with families and careers of their own, agreed to write letters to the orphanage. They spoke about how music had changed their lives, how it had given them purpose and direction when they were young. They spoke about talent and opportunity, and what happens when someone with a gift is denied the chance to share it with the world. Then the letters multiplied. Those former students told their friends told others. Within a week, over 100 letters had arrived at Street Catherine's, all addressed to Mr. Davies, all asking the same question. Why was this girl being denied her chance? But Mrs. Park knew that letters alone would not be enough. Mr. Davies was a stubborn man. He would read the letters, file them away, and continue with his decision. She needed something bigger, something he could not ignore. She called an old friend who worked at the local newspaper. They had known each other for 40 years, back when Mrs. Park was still performing and her friend was a young reporter covering arts and culture. Now her friend was an editor, and she owed Mrs. Park more than a few favors. 2 days later, a reporter came to Street Catherine's. He interviewed the staff, the children, and most importantly, he interviewed Lily. She was nervous at first, unsure what to say, but when he asked her about the piano, about what music meant to her, the words came naturally. "It saved me," she said quietly. "When I came here, I had nothing. I was nobody. The piano gave me a reason to wake up every day. It gave me something to work toward, something to believe in. It is the only thing I have ever been good at, the only thing that makes me feel like I matter." The article ran the following Sunday, on the front page of the local section. The headline read, "Orphan Pianist Denied Chance to Compete." There was a photograph of Lily sitting at the old piano in the practice room, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes looking somewhere far away. The response was immediate. People who had never heard of Lily or Street Catherine's were suddenly calling, writing, showing up at the gates. A local business owner offered to pay for all travel expenses. A retired music teacher volunteered to help with last-minute preparation. A community group started an online petition demanding that Lily be allowed to compete. Within 5 days, the petition had over 3,000 signatures. Mr. Davies tried to hold his ground. He gave a statement to the newspaper saying that he was acting in Lily's best interest, that he was protecting her from disappointment, that the competition was unrealistic for a girl in her situation. But the public did not agree. The pressure mounted. Phone calls flooded the orphanage office. Board members began asking questions. Local officials started paying attention. Finally, after 2 weeks of constant pressure, Mr. Davies called Lily into his office. She walked in expecting another rejection. Instead, he sat behind his desk looking tired and defeated. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual stern expression had been replaced by something closer to exhaustion. "You can go," he said flatly. Lily blinked. "What? What?" "The competition. You can go." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "But there is a condition." "Of course there was. There was always a condition. If you do not win," he said slowly. I will cut the piano program entirely. No more lessons. No more practice room. No more Mrs. Park coming to visit. If you fail, it ends. For you and for any other child here who might have wanted to learn. The words hung in the air like a threat, because that is exactly what they were. Lily wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him how unfair this was, how cruel it was to put that kind of pressure on her. But she looked at his face and knew that arguing would change nothing. This was his way of getting revenge for being forced to back down. This was his way of making sure that even if she went, she would carry a weight so heavy it might crush her. Fine, she said. Her voice did not shake. I will win. Mr. Davies almost smiled. Almost. We will see. The next 6 weeks were a blur. Mrs. Park worked with Lily every single day, sometimes for 5 or 6 hours at a time. They went over every piece she would perform, note by note, phrase by phrase. They talked about breath and emotion, and how to tell a story without words. Mrs. Park pushed her harder than ever before, and Lily pushed herself even harder. But beneath the preparation, beneath the practice, and the focus, fear was growing. It started as a small knot in her stomach, and grew larger every day. She would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, imagining everything that could go wrong. What if she forgot the notes? What if her hands froze? What if she got on that stage and discovered she was not good enough after all? The day finally came. Mrs. Park drove her to the city where the competition was being held. The concert hall was enormous, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers and ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky. Lily had never seen anything like it. She had never even been outside her small town before. The other competitors began to arrive. Lily watched them from a corner of the lobby, trying to stay invisible. They came with their families, their private coaches, their expensive clothes and confident smiles. They carried themselves like they belonged here, like they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. One girl walked past with her mother, talking loudly about her summer studying in Vienna. Another boy mentioned casually that his teacher had once played for the president. Everyone seemed to know each other, trading stories about past competitions and famous instructors. Lily stood alone in her borrowed dress, holding a folder of sheet music she had photocopied at a library. She had no stories to trade, no summers abroad, no famous teachers. She had a dusty piano in an orphanage and an old woman who believed in her. It did not feel like enough. The rehearsal was scheduled for the afternoon. Each competitor would have 15 minutes on the stage to get familiar with the piano and the acoustics of the hall. When Lily's turn came, she walked out under the bright lights and felt her chest tighten. The piano was beautiful, a grand Steinway, polished to perfection, worth more money than she could imagine. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. Nothing happened. Her hands would not move. Her mind went blank. The notes she had practiced 1,000 times simply vanished. She pressed a key, and the sound echoed through the empty hall. Lonely and wrong. She tried again. Wrong again. Panic rose in her throat. She could feel the eyes of the judges watching from somewhere in the shadows. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. Mr. Davies and his cruel condition. The children back at the orphanage who would lose their chance to learn music if she failed. Her mother, watching from somewhere she could not see. She stood up abruptly and walked off the stage. Her vision was blurry with tears. She found a quiet hallway behind the auditorium and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She called the only person who might understand. Mrs. Park answered on the second ring. I cannot do this, Lily said, her voice breaking. I am not ready. I do not belong here. These people, they have everything, and I have nothing. I am going to fail. I am going to ruin everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mrs. Park spoke, her voice was calm and steady. Lily, listen to me. Close your eyes. Lily closed her eyes. Now forget them. Forget the judges. Forget the other competitors. Forget Mr. Davies and his conditions. Forget all of it. I cannot. You can. Because none of that matters. When you sit at that piano tomorrow, You are not playing for them. You are playing for your mother. You are playing for every child who was ever told they were not enough. You are playing for yourself. For the little girl who found a broken piano in a storage room and taught herself to feel again. Mrs. Park's voice softened. That girl is still inside you. She has been fighting her whole life. She is not going to stop now. Lily opened her eyes. The tears were still there. But something else was there too. Something small and stubborn and unbreakable. Okay, she whispered. Okay, okay. I will play. She hung up the phone and stood alone in that quiet hallway. Tomorrow, she would walk onto that stage in front of hundreds of strangers. Tomorrow, she would sit at a piano worth more than her entire life and play like her future depended on it. Because it did. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and walked back toward the light. The morning of the competition arrived gray and cold. Lily had barely slept. She lay in her small hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city waking up outside her window. In a few hours, she would walk onto that stage and either change her life forever or lose everything she had worked for. She got up before the sun was fully risen and took a long shower. The hot water helped calm her nerves a little. She put on the dress that a kind woman from the community had bought for her. It was simple, dark blue, nothing fancy, but it fit her well and made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Mrs. Park met her in the hotel lobby. The old woman looked tired too, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like faith. She took Lily's hands in hers and squeezed them gently. No matter what happens today, Mrs. Park said, I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. Lily nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. They took a taxi to the concert hall. The streets were busy with morning traffic. People rushing to work, living their ordinary lives. They had no idea that a 14-year-old girl was riding past them, carrying the weight of an impossible dream on her shoulders. The concert hall looked even more intimidating in the daylight. Lily walked through the grand entrance and felt herself shrinking with every step. The other competitors were already there, warming up in practice rooms, surrounded by their coaches and families. Lily found a quiet corner and sat alone, clutching her folder of music. The competition would last all day. 12 finalists, each performing 2 pieces. The order had been drawn randomly, and Lily was last. She did not know if that was good or bad. It meant hours of waiting, hours of watching the others play, hours of doubt, eating away at whatever courage she had left. One by one, the competitors took the stage. Lily watched from the wings, hidden in the shadows. They were all incredible. A boy with perfect posture played a piece so technically flawless that the judges nodded in approval. A girl with long black hair performed with such passion that the audience gasped. Each performance felt like a mountain Lily would have to climb over. The hours crawled by. Lily's stomach was in knots. She could not eat. She could barely breathe. Mrs. Park sat beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement. But even her voice seemed far away. Finally, there was only one competitor left. Her. A stagehand approached and told her it was time. Lily stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Mrs. Park hugged her tightly. Play for your mother, she whispered. Play for yourself. Nothing else matters. Lily walked toward the stage. The hallway seemed endless. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She reached the edge of the curtain and stopped. Beyond it, she could hear the murmur of the audience. Hundreds of people waiting to judge her. Waiting to see if she was worth anything at all. She reached into the pocket of her dress and felt the worn edges of her mother's photograph. She had carried it with her every day for 8 years. She carried it now. Taking one last breath, she stepped out onto the stage. The lights were blinding. For a moment, she could not see anything except white. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw the audience stretching out before her. Rows and rows of faces looking up at her. In the front row sat the judges, their expressions unreadable. Somewhere in the middle, Mrs. Park had found a seat. She was the only familiar face in a sea of strangers. Lily walked to the piano. The Steinway gleamed under the lights, magnificent and terrifying. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. The hall fell silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, just silence, heavy and expectant. She looked down at the keys. Her hands were trembling. For one horrible moment, she felt the same panic from rehearsal rising in her chest. The blankness, the fear, the feeling that she did not belong here, that she was fooling everyone, that she was about to fail in front of the whole world. Then she closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. Not the photograph, but the real woman. The sound of her laughter, the smell of her perfume, the way she used to hum while making breakfast, the way she played the piano late at night when she thought Lily was asleep, filling their tiny apartment with music that sounded like love. She thought about the storage room, the dusty piano with its yellowed keys. The first note she ever played, ringing out in the silence like a tiny miracle. She thought about Mrs. Park, who had given her thousands of hours without asking for anything in return. About the community that had rallied behind her. About every person who had ever believed in her when she could not believe in herself. And she thought about the little girl who arrived at Street Catherine's with nothing but a photograph and a broken heart. The girl who stopped speaking. The girl who stopped hoping. The girl who found a piano in the darkness and taught herself to feel again. She opened her eyes, and she began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, like a whisper in an empty room. The melody floated up into the vast space of the concert hall, delicate and pure. Then, it began to build. Layer upon layer, the music grew stronger, deeper, more complex. It swelled and soared, filling every corner of the hall, wrapping around every person in the audience like a warm embrace. Lily played her mother's lullabies. She played the loneliness of empty hallways. She played the ache of being passed over, of being told she was not enough. She played the joy of discovering something beautiful in a forgotten room. She played the gratitude for an old woman who saw something in her that no one else could see. She played everything she had ever felt, everything she had ever been, everything she dreamed she might become. The music crashed like waves against a shore, then pulled back to a whisper. It danced and wept and laughed and mourned. It told the story of a life that should have been crushed by circumstances, but refused to break. When the final note faded into silence, Lily kept her eyes closed. She was afraid to open them, afraid to see disappointment on the faces of the judges, afraid to see pity in the eyes of the audience. Then she heard it. It started as a single clap, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The sound grew and grew until it was like thunder, filling the entire hall. Lily opened her eyes and saw something she had never seen before. The audience was standing. Every single person in that concert hall had risen to their feet. The judges were standing too. And one of them, an older man with white hair and glasses, was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. The other competitors watched from the wings with expressions of shock and awe. Even the stagehands had stopped to stare. The applause went on and on. It seemed like it would never end, but Lily barely heard it. She was looking down at her lap, where her hand rested on the photograph she had pulled from her pocket. Her mother smiled up at her, frozen forever at a piano, frozen forever in a moment of perfect happiness. "I did it, Mom," Lily whispered. "I finally did it." The results were announced an hour later. Lily won. Not by a small margin, but unanimously. Every single judge had given her the highest score of the day. The scholarship was hers. The performance at the famous concert hall was hers. A future she had never dared to imagine was suddenly, impossibly, hers. Mrs. Park found her backstage after the ceremony. The old woman was crying, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She pulled Lily into a hug so tight it almost hurt. "You did it," Mrs. Park said through her tears. "You beautiful, brave girl, you did it." Lily hugged her back. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she let herself feel happy. Not just a flicker of happiness, not just a moment. Real happiness, deep and warm and lasting. She thought about Mr. Davies and his cruel condition. She thought about all the families who had passed her over, all the people who had called her strange and difficult. She thought about every voice that had ever told her she would never amount to anything. They were all wrong, because Lily had learned something that no one had ever taught her. Greatness does not come from wealth or privilege or connections. It does not come from having the right teachers or the right clothes or the right family. Greatness comes from the soul, from the refusal to give up, from the stubborn belief that you matter, even when the whole world tells you that you do not. And Lily's soul had spoken at last. The whole world had listened, and for once, the whole world had nothing to say. They were speechless.